All right. Well, then I will jump into housekeeping stuff. And then you have a link there in the chat for the Menti stuff. As you're if you're joining and you want to use the Menti meter link, you can check it right there. So, welcome to the Collaborative Science for Story series. This is Nick Sobral with the Science Collaborative. Today's webinar features a research project whose reciprocal collaboration approach revealed complex patterns of surface and groundwater flow, while also supporting indigenous resource management strategies for biocultural restoration. And you'll hear more from the team in a second here, but as usual, I've got some housekeeping stuff to get through. So if you're just joining, you can just feel free to do the Mentimeter stuff while I get through the rest of the housekeeping stuff. Okay, so the National Estuarine Research Reserve System is a national network of 30 reserves, as shown on this map. This is a NOAA program that works in collaboration with a local place-based partner, either a state agency, university, or nonprofit at each site. Each reserve site includes programs focused on the activities that you can see on the slide, which include land stewardship, research and scientific monitoring, training and engagement programs for the public and local officials, and education. The Science Collaborative program's mission is to support collaborative research that addresses coastal management issues that are important to the reserve system and that strengthen the system's ability to impact coastal management and decision making. And one important way that we meet this goal is by sharing these collaborative science accomplishments publicly through a variety of channels, including the webinar series, and which features project teams supported by the Science Collaborative program staff and partners. So a quick note on informed consent. Webinars are both a way for us to share some project impacts more broadly, but also they're a really valuable learning opportunity for us as a program. Insights from speakers and participants like you can help inform how we support others in doing their own collaborative science work, for example, in the development of future workshops or webinars, or resources such as tools, tips, and case studies for our open access guide to collaborative science, which can be found on our website. With that in mind, we just want to inform attendees that insights or feedback you share, for example, in chat or via a webinar exit survey, may be used for program learning and development purposes. Please note that if we capture a direct quote from you that we'd like to use for learning purposes, we will reach out to seek permission beforehand and provide an explanation of its use. Any direct quotes will only be used anonymously. So housekeeping for Q&A stuff. All attendees are muted upon entry, as you probably noticed. We'll be handling presentation-related questions via the Q&A feature. You can enter questions for the presenters as they occur to you throughout the webinar. In fact, we encourage it so you don't forget them. And we'll plan to discuss as many as we can at the end of the presentation afterwards. So you'll also be able to verbalize questions if you want to during the Q&A session. You can just raise your hand and let organizers know that you want to verbalize a question when we get to that point, and we will confirm with you before you come off mute that you're ready to ask your question. Chat will be visible to all. I'm not sure if it is yet, but I'll open it up after I finish talking here, so you can use it to ask us technical questions or talk amongst yourselves as well. All right, and with that, let me introduce our speakers for today. So joining us are Shimi, a faculty specialist at the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology at the University of Hawaii, as well as the research coordinator at the Heʻeia National Estuarine Research Reserve. Veronica Gibson is a former postdoctoral fellow with the Heʻeia National Estuarine Research Reserve and is now the Science and Planning Manager for Malama Manalua. And Henrietta Dulai is a professor at the Department of Earth Sciences at the University of Hawaii. And I think Veronica has some results to share with us, so I will stop screen share so she can pull that up.
Yes, thank you, Nick. So we asked you to enter your favorite water-related fantasy character. Those of you who are still joining may still enter by scanning this code or clicking the link in the chat that is hopefully there. This is something we've used to connect with our partners during meetings, and we thought it would be a fun way to get to know you folks. So far we have Ursula, Katara from Avatar, and Squidward. Thank you to those who responded. I see there's 7 active, so this should update as you're going in, but maybe we'll come back to this slide after we get to the next one. So we asked, where is your estuary? Oh, only 1 of 7 responses there. Hopefully folks are getting in here. Well, so far we have one from, looks like New Hampshire. Or Maine, a little hard to see there. Let's see if we got any more on this one. Nope. Maybe we should have given you folks some more time here. What's happening in the chat? Post the link to everyone. So our last question is, what are your biggest questions about how water flows in your estuary? And we don't have any responses yet. So we'll give you folks a chance. We're still really interested to know who's on here and where your estuary is. We'd love to find out who's on our. Oh, here we go. We have some more. We have Selkies, Misty from Pokemon, Ariel, and Moana. Thank you all for participating. We really appreciate you. Let's see. You do have to click a button to go to the next question if you're having a problem with that. It took me a moment to find that. If you scroll down, there we go. Now we have a few more people found it. Wisconsin and North Carolina, great job finding that next question button. See, any more? Any more? Moana is getting bigger. Gave you a little hint on that one. Okay, and we'll see if we got any on the last one. Sorry, we will have to move on so that we can get to our presentations. So what are your biggest questions about how water flows in your estuary? How to restore rivers flow from upland? See, folks, another one. Exchange from adjacent wetlands and pore water. So these are echoing some things that came up in our research as well. And we'll give you just one more minute to answer those ones. Oh, we have some Hawaii folks in, looks like the Big Island, maybe Oahu or Kauai. The map is a little small. More Texas checking in and California. So thank you all for being here. Oh, now we have 16 people on the Menti. Okay, I'm going to cut the Menti off in just a minute. Let's check. Moana's getting bigger, even bigger. Big Z. Okay, I appreciate Big Z. Thank you for that. I'm wondering who's on here now. And okay, shall I end the Menti team? We'll still appreciate your responses and take a look after the fact if we end now. One last one. Impacts of dams, so historical flows versus current. Thank you all. Very good to get to know you folks a little bit before we get started. We will have an opportunity for one more Menti later in the presentation, so stay tuned for that. Ooh. Ooh. And with that, we'll get started. I'm going to hand it over to Shimi Ree to start our presentation on Groundwater Chronicles, wet and lateral stories from our Wetland WAI project. Take it away, Shimi.
Thanks, Veronica. So thanks again, everybody, for joining in. Thanks, Nick, for the introduction. So like Veronica mentioned, questions like that we have actually used every time we met with our partners, and we met with our partners a lot throughout this project, and we'll go into that a little bit. But that was a way to do a fun icebreaker, to have people start thinking about water, and it's a really good way to just, have people start conversations about Big Z, why Big Z, and just get people really familiar. So our title is called Wetland, Water, and Ike, which is knowledge in Olelo, Hawaii. And we took the acronym and made it WAI. We like acronyms in NOAA and Science Collaborative, right? And WAI actually also means freshwater in Olelo, Hawaii. So it was really appropriate. And we had 4 objectives for our project. So the first one is to measure surface and groundwater flow throughout the Heʻeia ahupuaʻa. And ahupuaʻa is basically a social and ecological social division that was managed by Native Hawaiians. And we can think of it roughly as watershed boundaries. And we did it through various seasons, dry and wet seasons, and extreme conditions such as king tides and rain events. We also wanted to increase our collective understanding of Heʻeia Hawaii through culture, science, and policy. And then there were many other data streams that were around, such as the USGS stream gauge, the tidal gauges, and we consolidated into an accessible online application for use by all of us and resource managers. And then lastly, we worked with our education coordinator lead to develop Hawaii-focused curriculum on culture, science, and conservation and stewardship for existing education programs. But today, for the sake of time, we are focusing on the first point here and sharing a lot of cool data that we got and better understanding of the Heʻeia ahupuaʻa and the water flow. But I have to say this project was really, really fun and so multidisciplinary, and it has been a really, really awesome experience for all of us. So today's talk is structured as such. We're going to do kind of a short introduction. So as I imagine, many of you who are tuning in are probably pretty familiar with Heʻeia in Hawaii by now and how we do things there. We're going to share two stories from our Groundwater Chronicles with you and then end with conclusions. So briefly, Heʻeia National Estuarine Research Reserve, we're showing you our new logo. We finally have a logo that we're really, really proud of. You'll start seeing a lot more of it in many of our presentations and hopefully merch soon. So in Heʻeia, we have had a history of WAI or water activism for protections in Heʻeia. And as many of you know, our 2017 NERRS designation was a totally community-driven action that was driven by our nonprofit organization, our stewardship organizations, and most of all, our genealogical descendants that have grown up in Heʻeia. And our NERRS, our reserve, is built on kupuna or elder and indigenous steward guidance. Many of them serve on our reserve advisory board and guide all of our activities in Heʻeia Reserve. And as many of you know, again, we conduct biocultural restoration, which includes the restoration of our fish pond or local i'a and our wetland or hoi, as well as the Lateral fields or lo'ikalo, as you can see in that top photo, towards Aina Momona, which is roughly translated as sustainable abundance, which includes not just water abundance, but sustenance of all of the people that is part of the landscape, as well as this super cute little bird, Io, which is our Hawaiian stilt. And this is a cute little baby that's on the bottom picture. And then we also employ reciprocal practices for collaborative science, which includes many things such as requesting research and ensuring that our research remains collaborative. So just to orient you to how our water is managed in our ahupuaʻa, which includes mountaintop all the way to the waters of Heʻeia. And so right at the top of the mountain is Haiku Stream, which is stewarded by a nonprofit organization called Papahana Kuaola. And then parallel to that, there is also Ioleka'a Stream, which is stewarded by our genealogical descendants, Uncle Wally and Auntie Donnie, who make up Papakipuka. And they join to actually make Heʻeia Stream, which enters our hoi or wetland, which is stewarded by Kako'oiwi, which is one of our co-management partners in Heʻeia NERRS. And then it enters Heʻeia Fish Pond, which is stewarded by Paipaio Heʻeia, and then also goes out of the muliwai or stream mouth into our coastal waters, which is managed by Department of Land and Natural Resources. Next slide. So how this project came about is that since our designation, we have been engaging with our partners to ask, what is your priorities? What are your priorities? We did a lot of needs assessment and market analysis when we were designated. And shortly after COVID, we met and had a strategic monitoring workshop. What are your priorities now that many of the mangroves and our invasive species have been removed or are in the closing final moments of being removed. And you can see in these cloud bubbles, so Kako'iwi told us we want to understand the punawai systems, the springs, how the aquifer is going up and down, the movement of water. And Paipaio Heʻeia told us top priority is wai and all the things associated with that wai. And collectively, the managers told us that it's the researchers' role to be part of that ecosystem. Coming out and getting your hands dirty with the managers will make the study more robust and accurate. So together we coordinated these hydrologic methods, brought in experts, created a cross-disciplinary team to address these needs in a NERRS Science Collaborative grant. And these are our project partners. Many of them are the water stewards that I just mentioned, but we also partnered with USGS, Board of Water Supply, who manages our waters, Commission on Water Resource Management, the School of Ocean and Earth Science and Technology, which many of us and Henrietta is also part of, and then the Nature Conservancy, who has been doing a lot of work in Heʻeia prior to our designation. Next slide. And as you can see, our Hawaii project team, the top row shows many of us who played leadership roles, and you can see the science collaborative leads, the data, the technical leads, project leads, and et cetera. That's written under the names. And then I have to mahalo our dedicated field team, which included us, Veronica and Henrietta and myself, but also Kyle Bosworth, who we hired on this project. And then our swamp technicians, Gus Robertson and Noel Machado, who really went out on the whim, especially when we were storm chasing. And then, of course, amazing support by those mentioned on the right. All of them were really important to making this project successful. And then, as many of you know, we employ this collaborative research framework, which included this iterative review with project partners. So we had hui vai. So hui can also mean a group or gathering of advisory team members that consisted of many of the people mentioned on the previous slide. And we met with them at least quarterly, but to go over even dirty data, to say, hey, please don't spread this out. We just got this really cool data. And then they were really invested in our work. And we also had monthly Laulima or service activity days where we would casually talk story. That's how we talk about, kind of like water cooler chat in Hawaii, and talk about our results and the next field work or et cetera. And that was a way of reciprocity so that we are actually providing sweat equity into our project as well. We did provide site access fees and collaboration fees into the Science Collaborative grants so that our project partners were compensated for their time and participation in our work. And they were all, provided co-authorships or attributions into specific work. And we also incorporated Indigenous data sovereignty by creating metadata codes when we submitted our data, so that our data also had these precautions about future usage of the data. Okay, so without further ado, we have a lot of data to get through, so I'm going to hand it over to Veronica to talk about our first story, how does water flow in the Heʻeia ahupuaʻa?
Yeah, so I was lucky to be brought in with the NERRS having built all those connections and built it into the grant. So that helped our project to flow. Thank you, Shimi. So our first story that we'll tell you about today is how does water flow in the Heʻeia ahupuaʻa. This focuses on stream flow using stable isotopes and radon, water ages, how long water is in the subsurface, lateral flow using hydrogen and oxygen isotopes, and finally our nutrient fluxes. These are our study sites that were co-developed with our partners. Many of these sites we would not have found without our partners' information and helping us to literally cut pathways, especially within the wetland. So this is built upon years of partner knowledge and working with these ecosystems, as are the questions that they asked, which are how much water is flowing into the wetland and the local ia, the Native Hawaiian fish pond aquaculture system. How much of the water in Heʻeia is groundwater? Because there's some question or need to understand how much water is in the stream to support our loʻikalo, our taro agriculture here in the wetland. But how much groundwater is also contributing to that? And how does the watershed hydrology and nutrient fluxes change across seasons, extreme rain event, and tidal events? Due to the short nature of this webinar, we won't be able to get into details about all of the seasonal and extreme event changes, but know that we do have that and feel free to please send us questions if you would like to know more. The methods we used throughout this work included stream flow using our Hotch handheld flow meter that you can see the guys metering in the bottom right-hand corner. We also did geochemistry measurements using stable isotopes of hydrogen and oxygen, which gives us the recharge elevation. We used radon as a groundwater indicator. We used chlorofluorocarbons and sulfur hexafluoride to trace the ages of waters coming out in springs. And then we used grab samples submitted to a lab to measure nutrients. This was a figure that we based this work upon. This work built upon work by the USGS and previous scientists in Heʻeia. And in 1985, this figure of the basic understanding of the hydrology within Heʻeia was built. The USGS has also done stream flow measurements throughout the ahupuaʻa. However, what this work contributed to that knowledge was that the wetland previously was a black box, and the understanding of groundwater was another limited area of knowledge within the ahupuaʻa. So we sought to update this figure and the model of hydrologic flow within Heʻeia. And we're very proud that this is our figure that we've developed based on our results that shows us a lot more of the subsurface flow and connections to neighboring ahupuaʻa or watersheds. And with that, we will use this figure throughout this talk to guide you through each of our results and methods. And I will hand it off to Henrietta now to start telling you about the hydrogen and oxygen isotopes.
Thank you, Veronica. Hi, everyone. So while the earlier sketch that Veronica showed only had a few arrows indicating groundwater flow, we are very proud to have updated that, expanded that with quite many arrows now that our research either confirmed or implied. And I will walk you through some of examples of findings that allowed us to have bigger confidence in understanding the ways groundwater flows and actually put these arrows on the map. And so let me start out with our geochemical tracer studies. We use stable isotopes of hydrogen and oxygen composition of water, because these allow the fingerprinting of precipitation and recharge happening along the ahupuaʻa. There is an elevation gradient, and that resulted at lower elevations in the coastal plain, rain being more enriched in the heavier isotopes, and then as clouds move up into more inland and up along the mountains, they are forced to higher elevation, and the rains become more depleted in these signatures in the heavier isotopes. Another tracer that I will also touch on is a radioactive isotope radon, which is continuously produced from rocks and sediments in the aquifer. And since rain and surface runoff do not have radon, if you see radon in a stream, that means that groundwater had to contribute to its flow, and I will explore that later. So getting back to the stable isotopes of oxygen and hydrogen in water, on the left, we see a figure that shows the local meteoric water line that has been established for this area during previous studies. And we see that our groundwater results closely follow the local meteoric water line. But we also see that they are spaced out. And on the earlier map that you have seen, the study sampling sites, the orange ones indicate upstream, and the cyan is downstream. And what we see here is that the upstream and downstream locations have a little bit different signature. Another parameter that these isotopic ratios allow us to derive is the d-axis, which is shown on the right for the stream and groundwater. This is even more sensitive to the altitude effect, causing groundwater to have unique fingerprints along the ahupuaʻa. So applying our new cross-section here, I try to illustrate that upstream recharge and a precipitation and resulting recharge has much more depleted isotopic signatures than the downstream location. And so the one that includes also the wetland is then showing us also the combined effect of these specifically. When we look at stable isotope composition of the stream sampled in the wetland, we see that it is a mixture of upstream and downstream stable isotope signatures. If the stream was only fed by groundwater from upstream, it would have a different signature matching those of the upstream groundwater. So this means that recharge along the watershed contributes to groundwater, which is a very important finding. We are all assuming that most of the groundwater comes from upstream, because that's where most of the precipitation happens. We can also tell that the stream is not uniquely sourced by upstream groundwater, and that surface water-groundwater interactions in this watershed are important. where we plotted the d-axis, which is a parameter derived from delta 2H and delta O18. It's also sensitive to recharge elevation and provides further evidence of the distinct groundwater signatures. The significance here is that local, not just upstream recharge, which in this setting is within the impermeable dike complexes, signify that the presence of dikes may impede downstream flow and enhance lateral flow, which we indicated by these sideways arrows. And that, we believe, connects the ahupuaʻa to also neighboring watersheds and allows water to flow along these dikes. So we found that the water sources were indeed distinct among the different regions of the ahupuaʻa, specifically that high elevation recharge was different from lower elevation recharge, and then the stream seemed to be a mixture of these. Not all groundwater and stream water comes from high elevation recharge. Local recharge is important, and that local groundwater inputs from lower elevation plus the groundwater from upstream both contribute to surface water within the wetland and the lo'i. And lastly, results imply that lateral flow likely occurs from the neighboring ahupuaʻa along dikes to explain all that local recharge. We used radon as a specific groundwater tracer to follow up on these surface water groundwater interactions along the stream. So we employed radon, which is a natural radioactive tracer that is a noble gas. It's released from rocks and sediments. If radon is observed in the stream and wetland and at levels above baseline, indicates that groundwater discharge is at that location. So radon, being a noble gas, readily evades from the water during stream flow, so allows us to see new local inputs. And that's very important. In that, radon concentrations upstream in the stream were highly elevated, but really radon was present all along stream flow. Here we use the actual measured groundwater radon concentrations and in combination with the stream radon concentrations to estimate groundwater inflow required to support the observed stream radon inventory that we found. And that confirmed that about 40–50% of stream flow is locally added groundwater upstream. And within the wetland that you see zoomed in on the bottom figures here, we still have measurable excess radon that corresponds to about 4% of groundwater inflow at each location, which would add up to about 2,400 cubic meters of groundwater discharge to the wetland per day. And so that's not insignificant. And that's fine, summarized on this image now. So we're really confident in adding on these arrows, these additional arrows that signify that we believe that groundwater contributes to the stream all along its flow. And it's obviously a much higher contribution upstream, but still important downstream. On top of that, we believe that some of that, what we call radon-enriched input, is kind of shallow recirculation within the wetland as surface waters infiltrate the subsurface and then resurface again. Here, we employed chlorofluorocarbons and sulfur hexafluoride gases. These are anthropogenic gases released since roughly the 50s, 60s as age tracers of groundwater since the recharge that supported it. The upstream springs show high oxygen and low organic matter content, and therefore CFCs and SF6 produced very consistent ages. And those are the orange symbols on the left of the figure, the older ages. And because they all align very nicely along what we assume a piston flow model, we could determine their absolute age being 50 to 60 years. When we move to downstream to the wetland, there we have reducing conditions, high organic matter. Under these conditions, CFCs degrade. So we only could use SF6, and we use that to determine apparent age. We cannot tell whether it's a single water mass or a mixture of water masses. So that's why we call it an apparent age, which is still a considerable 20 to 40 years. And that is significant in that the wetland groundwater is not just recently recharged rain or stream, but also water that must have moved from farther distances, either through the dike complexes within the alluvium or by lateral flow along the dikes and sediments followed from the upland flow. So the older age of the wetland groundwater suggests that it is more resilient to precipitation variations, so droughts and so forth, as it is buffered by inflow of older water masses. So next, we are going to go over stream and groundwater quantity, and I hand it off to Veronica.
Thank you, Henrietta. So as you can see, a lot of data was collected in this project across these 41 study sites. So I'm just going to give a high level of stream and groundwater volume averaged across all of our samplings. So on average, the stream volume entering the wetland was 3.73 million gallons per day, and exiting the wetland was 3.55 million gallons per day. So there was some, we might call it consumption of water within the wetland, retention of water. Groundwater contributes 4% of surface flow on average for all of the wetland sites. So we do have that importance of groundwater coming into the wetland. And similarly for our nutrients, we are still working on the stories from here. But again, averaged across all of our samplings, we have a few stories that come out. This is this table goes from upland to the developed region to the wetland. So high elevation to low elevation from top to bottom. We see that nitrogen increases through the watershed as we would expect until it reaches the wetland where nitrogen is consumed. Phosphorus increases roughly up until the wetland, some decrease in the developed region before the wetland, and then the largest decrease within the wetland. Whereas silica is variable above the wetland, but ultimately consumed and declines by half within the wetland. So the take home is that the wetland consumes nutrients. We have a lot more intricate stories to parse out with the extreme events in the season. So stay tuned for that coming sometime in future. So our highlights from this story one are that groundwater is an important contributor to surface water volume and nutrients for the wetland. Age tracers and hydrogen and oxygen isotopes provide a clearer picture of groundwater flow within Heʻeia than was previously understood. And that includes how deep this water flows, how long it's in the subsurface, and the very interesting revelation that validates some of what our Indigenous stewardship partners have been saying for generations is that water is connected to neighboring watersheds, and that what we do within the Heʻeia ahupuaʻa influences our neighboring watersheds in Kahului and Kaneohe. Nutrients are consumed within the wetland. Very important that the wetland keeps doing its job in consuming nutrients. And seasonal changes in water flow are important for biocultural restoration planning and policy, something we didn't get to touch on here as much as we would like. With that, we're going to move into story two. We'll move to the local i'a, the Hawaiian aquaculture system. We were very interested for our stewardship partners here in what the water looks like entering this ecosystem. So how much submarine groundwater discharge is entering here? And what do the nutrient pictures look like? How does the nutrients feed this aquaculture system? The Heʻeia local i'a is an 800-year-old fish pond enclosed by a rock wall. So this is a biocultural system that was employed across the Hawaiian Islands. The Hawaiians were very ingenious in that they saw these natural regions of productivity where submarine groundwater discharge entered the ecosystem. And by enclosing it with a rock wall, they basically expanded this region of productivity to allow control of the juvenile fish that rely on these lower salinity regions. They can control the fish coming in and out and allow them to propagate within this fish pond, but also they expanded this region of low wave action, shallow water, high nutrients, and high sunlight to essentially create a pasture of microbenthos for those fish to feed on and to grow momona or fat and sweet. This is a 0.36 kilometer square fish pond. It's shallow, 0.2 to 0.9 meters across throughout the fish pond. 50 to 260,000 cubic meters per day. And the Heʻeia stream contributes about 4,200 cubic meters per day to this fish pond with an average precipitation of 1,800 millimeters. And you can see, let's see. Oh, here, we zoom in a bit here. So the wetland and the lo'i kalo agriculture that happens with above and within the wetland are intricately linked to this fish pond. And the co-management partners work very closely together to make sure that they don't open up the water flow into the fish pond too rapidly during restoration, because sedimentation is a problem within the fish pond and within the bay. So you can see it says not currently flowing. These are our co-management partners working together to ensure that they restore and make sure that the water coming in is what is needed on the other side. How our research helped this is we informed what are the quantities of wetland, spring, and coastal groundwater discharge contributing to this, and what are the quantities of nutrients flowing into the local i'a by these 5 currently flowing outflows that enter between the wetland and the local i'a. These are sampling conditions. So we did a few surveys within the local i'a to measure groundwater and nutrients. And we sampled during, what you see here are the stream discharge on the top and the precipitation for the times when we sampled, which are the red X's on the bottom. And you can see that we sampled during times of higher blaze flow during the wet season. We sampled during some really nice, well, not nice for our partners, but really extreme dry season that shows us perhaps future conditions. And then some intermittently wet conditions during the beginning of a wet season. With that, I will hand it over to Henrietta to talk about our study design here.
Thank you. So at each time we surveyed the pond, we used groundwater radon measurements from the wetland, and then pond and pond also, there are springs along the pond, so we measured radon in those as well. And then performed a spatial survey with a kayak zigzagging across the pond while measuring radon continuously. We also performed several time series radon measurements over tidal cycles to see how coastal hydrology responds to tides in wet and dry seasons. And without further ado, let's go to the next slide that shows our results. We divided the pond area into triangles and calculated radon inventories and groundwater discharge rates required to support the observed radon inventories in each. We then summed up discharge rates along the land, the wall, and the center of the pond based on, again, discharges within these triangles. And the results show that groundwater discharge is not largest along the land where we expected based on the hydraulic gradient, but that all areas contribute some groundwater. Also, that wet season did not produce the most groundwater discharge. Instead, tides and water level differences between the pond and the bay mattered the most, and that's what you see on the right side indicated for the land, the center, and the wall side of the pond. And next slide shows kind of then the sketch as we visualize how this might work hydrologically. It's still a work in progress, but we definitely confirmed also with the time series measurements that groundwater discharge into the fish pond is driven by the hydraulic gradient between the pond and the coastal aquifer, where the coastal aquifer actually responds very effectively to changes in tides. And there are scenarios when the aquifer responds to the tides and have higher water level than the pond. So the pond water level is lagging. And those are the times when we see highest groundwater discharge rates. And nevertheless, groundwater discharge is also elevated outside of the fish pond, and we definitely see evidence for groundwater discharge inside the pond. Again, just highlights that we are very confident in those other two arrows that we put on this cross section, in that we have confirmed that groundwater discharge into the fish pond and into the bay are present and should be subject to further studies to really explore how the hydrology of, especially in like extreme times, king tides and precipitation and following precipitation events behaves. And with that, I'm
Oh,
handing
can I
it back to
chime in?
you.
I think we can also highlight here that this is really important for our co-management partners, that it was a surprise that the springs flow at the high tide and that there are large nutrient-rich springs outside the sluice gates. So there was some loss in knowledge between when the fish pond was active and became in this state of restoration. So when they saw that those springs are near where those gates are that let fish in and out, but on the outside, that helped to inform how their management and their restoration is going, and informed kind of their kupuna knowledge, linking back to how the fish pond was designed and how it's supposed to function today. And with that, I will continue with our story about the outflows here. So in addition to those groundwater flows, we wanted to understand more about the surface water flows. So we found that groundwater is an important nutrient source for the fish pond. It does have high concentrations of nutrients. However, the sheer volume of the stream means that it's a larger source of nutrients. So you can see the concentration graphed here in this green and blue, the blue being the groundwater. And you can see that nitrogen and phosphorus is definitely a higher concentration in the groundwater than the stream, silica comparable. However, in this table, you can see that the sheer volume of the stream is just so high that it's still a really important source of nitrogen and phosphorus to this ecosystem. Well, the submarine groundwater discharge may be a more sustained source during these drier seasons. So we did find that in the wet season, stream flow is elevated, therefore the nutrients are elevated. In some cases, like nitrogen, at least doubled during our 2 wet seasons. Phosphorus, again, also more than double. Silica, a little bit more complex story, but still higher in the wet season than the dry season. And again, just due to that sheer volume of the stream flow that's coming in through these outflows, excuse me. And with that, we will hand it off to Shami to talk about some of our conclusions from this project and what made the project so impactful.
Thanks, Veronica. Thanks, Henrietta. As you can see, we had quite a lot of fun and lots of water samples and measurements during this project. So, but we really wanted to conclude with what made this project impactful and successful, and what are some outcomes for biocultural restoration that Henrietta and Veronica already touched upon. The first thing that really made this project successful and impactful is we held ourselves accountable by putting the huiwai into our project, into our timeline for the Science Collaborative Grant, and we made ourselves do these quarterly meetings, even though it was really hard to schedule these meetings with, at least 30 plus people every single time. These quarterly meetings really shaped the project, the sites, the input of each person that participated into where and how we should sample and when. And not just the implementation and the design, but the interpretation of our results. Also, we did these really cool workshops. You can see some of our results on the pictures on the side. We did estuary art during our educator workshops, and also presented some of our data and products. And then the picture on the bottom shows how we linked policy, culture, and applied science. So we had experts from all of these different disciplines come and talk to us. And it was really appropriate and unfortunate, but appropriate that we had this panel right after the Lahaina fires. And so water management was really at the forefront of everybody's minds. And then also, we had increased capacity due to this Science Collaborative Grant. We had a dedicated outreach lead in our training and engagement coordinator, Casey Ching, who helped us with organizing everything from organizing huiwai meetings, coordinating the people who would show up, which, sometimes Many of our stewards are not on email all the time, so it ended up, means we go there in person and make sure that they are available, phone calls, texts, etc. And this was really an investment in collaborative engagement to have someone dedicated to this. And then we also had a dedicated education lead and our education coordinator, Fred Rapoon, who led these education workshops and combined the TOET program and the teachers that he brought in and our INA educators, so our steward educators. And we also had grad assistant who helped with our curriculum write-up. And then finally, we also had field capacity. So in addition to our swamp technicians who are already, doing an amazing job with not just swamp, but all of our other projects, we were able to hire a half-time project research technician on this. And because of the nature of our study, we were able to have our project partners and stewards join in on field sampling. So that was really cool because they got to see some places and experience groundwater sampling. And our outcomes for bioculture restoration, like Veronica said, it really, and as Henrietta said about some of the key findings that we had about lateral flow and the contribution of groundwater to our streams, it really improved our understanding of the water budget within not just our wetland and estuary, but our entire ahupuaʻa as a whole. And these identification of these older freshwater sources really gave this proof, this scientific proof of what our indigenous knowledge holders and stewards already knew that showed up in our mo'olelo and our stories. They're groundwater chronicles, but we really wanted to provide proof to that, our modern scientific proof to it. And that informs our fish recruitment, our native plant outplanting, bird habitat, and more also further assists in future funding acquisition for restoration, which is really important. It also informs our interim in-stream flow standard designation, which we are in currently, to designate having more water in our stream. And that's an ongoing effort with our commission and Board of Water Supply. And it informs future conceptual models, which are hopefully working on in the future and creating hydrologic models that can always be improved for Heʻeia and other ahupuaʻa across the islands. And then more research questions and applications to focus on. So that bottom picture you can see, we did a summer project with our NOAA Hauling scholar, Cora Jackson, and that's Veronica in the waders, and we deployed limu tiles. So in areas where we had submarine groundwater discharge to see what sort of macroalgae or Hawaiian limu will grow on these tiles. So without further ado, that's what we're sharing today. But if you guys can go to this Mentimeter, and we want to hear from you guys. You guys can also type into the chat if that's easier. We want to hear from you on questions. But how can you apply this work that you just learned about to your estuary? Are you already doing some of this work? And are there any parallels that are you seeing? And we're just really excited to share our work with you and just learn what stories might be coming out amongst the NERRS system. And we'll keep this up for a little bit, but we really wanted to also share our emails in our next slide, but we can put that in the chat. And then Veronica, if you can actually just hop onto the final slide, because I want to show a last picture, sorry, the slide after this, that shows our partners, and that wall, the CMU wall that you actually see is our haiku tunnel entrance. So that is actually the entrance to one of the dike systems at the back of our ahupuaʻa. And it's really like this, Harry Potter cupboard door. And that, you go in and there's water and there's groundwater that's actually coming out, as you can see that they're standing around. And these are all of our stewardship partners that came with us. And that was a really special experience. Okay, do you want to maybe put it back? Oh, Nick actually put the link to the Mentimeter in the chat. So if you guys can provide your comments, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks. And folks in the audience, if you have questions, now's a good time as well. So if you're in and around you're entering stuff into the Mentimeter, you have a question that you want to ask the presenters, you can type it into the Q&A or the chat, and we'll be watching both.
We have one about the recording, Nick. Everyone does get the recording, right?
Yes, I did not see that one, but yes, we do record the stuff automatically, and it'll be included in the summary email that will go out automatically if you signed up for the webinar. If you don't see it there within like a day, it probably just means we're still working on post-processing something. So just check back like by the end of the day tomorrow or the day after. I see a question in the Q&A about some artwork. Let me move the Q&A over here so I can actually see it. I love that estuary art was included in some of the educator workshops. Could you say a little more about it if we have time?
Mm.
Yeah, I can say something, and Veronica, if you can add if I missed anything. But we actually borrowed this project from Sabrina and those folks in Kachemak Bay, and we had these paint activities that you mix these colors, and then you basically mix it to create this cool estuary art, and that happened at our educator workshop. And a most recent one, actually. So Fred and his educator team, we run these educator workshops that merge together the teachers that are participating in the teacher professional development activities, as well as the educators, part of the nonprofit organizations that are stewarding the stream. So they are really blending how they might learn about the estuary or about white or water in different media. And the most recent one, the workshop contained, sound and music and other things. So this was a really cool way to explore art as part of estuary education. And props to Casey, actually, who pretty much ran that whole activity. So, and Amy.
Yeah, that was a great
The another
example.
question. Oh,
Oh,
sorry, go ahead.
that was a great example of CTP support because we had organized the whole workshop and then CTP Casey was able to bring that activity as a sort of participant presenter in the workshop. And that was a great way for engagement and for people to have a little memory of the VI project with their paintings.
Yeah, and sorry, one more thing. I think we actually, when Casey and I were out like buying the paints and thinking through, we might have, following Sabrina them, we might have had like colors for nitrogen and phosphorus and silica and phytoplankton, and people could pick what they wanted to mix and how much of it. Oh, I see another question in the chat. How can educators benefit from this information in the Midwest, especially in Big Ag, Iowa? Hmm. Um, My first thought is about nutrients and nutrient runoff and what sort of nutrients might be coming through the watershed or what might be consumed. Um, and quantifying it in not just surface streams, but perhaps any sort of underground water. But maybe Henrietta or Veronica, do you have any thoughts on that?
Um, Definitely, the application of stable isotopes and radon, they can be done in streams, wetlands, lakes, pretty much any system where one wants to study the surface water, groundwater interactions, at least from that perspective, it's universally applicable.
See some responses in the Mentimeter. We have only a few minutes left. I don't know if you want to respond to some of these.
Yeah, I love the one about hot springs because that's something we don't often encounter in Heʻeia, at least. So that's a really cool, different application for us. And I'd love to see some of these methods applied there. I see some possible folks from Hawaii responding. Thank you, folks, for being on here, and thank you to everyone who responded. But yes, we really appreciate that managers are recognizing the groundwater flow and exchange to neighboring ahupuaʻa. We love validating what our Indigenous knowledge holders have been saying for generations, and the use of traditional knowledge to identify optimal study sites for experiments and sample collection would best address your research question story. Yes, we've done a few presentations of this work, and some of them highlighted that particular concept. We did try to give you more of the biogeochemistry in this talk for the NERRS audience. But if you're interested in knowing more, we do have some talks that we gave specifically on how we actually did a really amazing talk with our co-management partner where I presented with one of the partners who works in the wetland, and he was able to talk about his traditional knowledge contribution to this work and how we work together. So it was a really feel good and good outcome for all of us to work in this way, and really changed how I, as a postdoc coming in, thought about doing research and what could be possible. Shimmy, I don't know if you and Henrietta want to respond to any of these.
No, I'm just excited that, people are interested in the water ages and, water isotopes and radon for their own estuary. I came from an ocean science background, so really sticking a pore water sampler underground and getting water was really amazing to me. And then getting all of this knowledge from underwater, chemistry was such eye-opening to my knowledge base.
Yeah, thank you all for responding. I think I'll go back to our final slide so you guys can get our emails one more time. And we might have shared them in the chat. No. Okay. I'm gonna go back. Can I? Here, in case anyone wants our emails. And thank you all so much for being here and for hearing about our work.
Thanks, folks, for answering questions, and thanks everybody for asking questions too. If you, as I mentioned earlier, if in case you missed it, this was recorded, so we'll post the recording either tomorrow or the day after. Basically, just check if you don't see it right away. Check the website, check the YouTube channel. It'll be in those places too. So, big thank you to our presenters for putting together such a great presentation. I learned a lot. I don't always get to see some of like the collaborative research projects in depth until a webinar. So it's always like fun for me to see some of this stuff in depth later too. Um, one thing to note on your way out, you'll be prompted to take the exit survey. So if you have feedback for the presenters or for us about how we are on the webinar series, you can enter it there. And note, though, that if you want a presenter to follow up with you on something specific, the survey is anonymous by default. So you have to provide contact information if you want somebody to reach out to you. Yeah, I think that's all I'll say for now. So again, thank you to everyone for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day. We'll catch you in the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Ariana.
Thank you.